The reality of the fact is that some time ago, Steinhoff made a donation to the Democratic Alliance in the form of the vehicle. The vehicle was for the purposes of campaigning in the Western Cape and for the use of the leader in execution of his duties in the Western Cape, because you'll recall that the leader's original base is in Gauteng, therefore he needs mobility when he's in the Western Cape. Therefore, that was used for that purposes. It wasn't a donation to the individual of Mmusi Maimane, but to the Democratic Alliance. And be that as it may, once the revelations regarding Steinhoff came to the fore, the party at the leadership level had a discussion regarding that donation and rightfully resolved that in light of those revelations, it would be appropriate to return the car to Steinhoff, which is what happened.
So the car has been returned.
The car has been resold, and there was absolutely no refusal on the part of Mmusi Maimane to return the car. Hence, it has been returned.
You do understand, though, the concerns about reputational damage.
We do understand that, but it is also important to set the record straight that different organizations and individuals fundraise and donate to political parties in a different way. In this instance, the party received a donation in the form of the vehicle. And I'd like to say it upfront, we, as a policy, do not reveal our donors, but in this regard, we took the exception of doing so in order to debunk some of the inaccurate reporting that has been shared as reflected in the story today. That what was done was there was a donation of a vehicle that was made. At the time, it wasn't problematic, and as developments occurred with the revelations of what happened at Steinhoff, the party did the responsible thing of having a discussion about that donation and its potential risk to the party. Hence, the rightful decision was taken to ultimately return it.
You don't think it's disingenuous to come and talk to us about, as a policy, you don't reveal your donors, when the head of your party is in Parliament asking the state president to reveal the details of his donors?
We have just revealed our donor in responding to you. And I'm saying to you that the reason we are exactly doing that is in response to the question that has been raised about this vehicle. So there is nothing disingenuous about being open about the source of the donation and the nature of that donation and what happened in the final conclusion of that donation, which was the return of the vehicle.
So political analyst Khaya Sithole joins us now to discuss this. Khaya, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us. So what are your thoughts, your impressions about what you've just heard now from the DA Soli Malatsi?
It's a problematic approach that the DA has taken, and what I call it is accidental accountability. Now, of course, accountability is when you come out to the public long before somebody leaks a story and long before somebody finds a way to make the story available to the public and say, look, we've done something like this and we feel that it's important for us to come to the public and disclose the nature of the circumstances so that people can be aware of what it is that went on. Now, what seems to have happened here is that because there are now some particular factions within the DA that are possibly trying to unseat Mmusi Maimane, at least according to his version, they are now leaking the story, and then the DA is saying, oh no, we did all the right things, we returned the car when it was appropriate to do so. But that's not the issue here. The issue is, why would you wait until such a very long time after the event to actually tell the public that you actually had this issue?
This is where the interest for me lies. Just listening to Mr. Malatsi there, he was saying that upon realization, or at least as soon as the controversy broke over Steinhoff, the car was returned. Is that where the big issue is? No. The big issue is the question of why do we have this situation where big business can actually sponsor political parties to such a nature. That's always been the enduring problem in South Africa. So whether you're looking at Bosasa and the ANC, whether you're looking at whoever is rumored to be funding the EFF, it is an ongoing problem, because now what the impression it gives to the rest of us as citizens is that actually, in order to get political decision makers to make particular decisions, there are ways in which you can do so by offering
offering them particular incentives, whether it's a form of a car, whether it's a form of a donation. And this system has always been very opaque. It has never been open to the public until now. They perhaps have the political party funding bill, but even that is not the law yet. It's just a bill as it's at
and
this stage.
I also want to talk about the bill. What exactly does it say, just in terms of the kind of donations that would be deemed problematic, unlawful or irregular?
Look, I think the nature of the bill is to simply say, if you as a political party are going to receive particular donations, we need to be aware of that. The transparency issue is what you're looking for here. Now, of course, some people do donations in kind. This car would have been something that you refer to as a donation in kind, but of course it does benefit the political party. In this case, it was the DA. There's also going to be direct cash donations. And the important thing here is that if people are going to be going out there and voting, and people are going to be listening to the messaging that you're putting out as a political party, they need to be aware of what particular interests you might be championing. So that type of transparency means that at least when I go and cast a ballot for you or for your opponent, at least I know what it is that you are doing behind the scenes. And I think that's the importance of that particular bill. And I think also the secondary problem, of course, is that what you're seeing here is that political parties themselves definitely need funding. Nobody's disputing that. Now it's a question of the source of the funding. And if that funding is channeled through a legitimate and a transparent structure, we are not going to debate that. But the problem now is that it's always been secret backdoor deals. And unfortunately, the question always has to be asked, what is in the donor's interest? Is the donor just a benevolent person, or is the donor hoping that you'll remember?
And I want us to talk about that in relation to another political party in just a moment. But I want to still remain with the DA. We've seen the DA's Mike Waters, according to reports, did request documentary proof from the leader Mmusi Maimane on the fact that he is indeed renting a house in Claremont, and if so, is it at market-related value? What do you make of this?
It's a problem because, let's face it, our parliamentarians are not poor. Not only are they not poor in terms of the salaries that they get, but guess what? They're probably the only citizens that get 2 houses that are paid for by the state. So the question always has to be asked, what exactly was it about the resources and the benefits already afforded to a person like Mmusi Maimane that was inadequate, that then got him to then say, let me go and get a secondary property. Now, of course, if he had then used his salary to get that property, absolutely nobody cares. But now it appears that that property was given to him by a donor. Again, the problem then escalates when he then declares it and gives the impression that the property is his own, when it now turns out that it's just renting the property. And I think the key problem here is that you've got the parliamentary register, which is where you declare your interest, but people don't seem to understand the importance of that register. That register is supposed to give us an indication that the assets that you have as a public servant and the income that you have as a civil servant is so much, because you're employed by us.
Which is also what I found interesting. So he declares a house, but then he then appears to do an about turn in which then the deeds registrar says, in fact, it can confirm that the only house that he owns is the one in Roodepoort. He then says, no, he is renting the house from a vessel, Jacobs, who then confirms the story. But why would you start by declaring the house if you don't own it?
And that is the big problem, because then we have to then question Mmusi Maimane's understanding of what parliamentary declarations are all about. It's not that we really care about how many houses you stay in. We're simply trying to draw the link between the type of salary and the type of income you're drawing as a civil servant paid by us and the type of benefits that you're able to get. So if somebody says you're paying you R1 million, but then you're buying a 10 million rand house, then obviously we know that there's something beyond what we know. And that's the point of these parliamentary declarations, in order just to ensure that civil servants are as transparent as they can be. Now, of course, when somebody then undermines that entire process by quite simply lying about it, because he did give the impression that the house belonged to him and it didn't belong to him, we then have to question how pervasive is that practice within the DA and within the entire National Assembly at all.
Let's talk about the entire National Assembly, because we saw another story that caught our attention this weekend in the Mail and Guardian. The EFF's second in command, Floyd Shivambu, denying allegations that a shortfall on his vehicle was paid by VBS Bank. He's actually denied having even admitted that. You've read the story and his comments. What are your comments on it?
So the interesting thing here is that if you're going to be a politician that has a patronage network of something, the golden rule is that you put as many layers in between the source and the destination of the funds as possible. It's the unwritten rule. So of course, if you're going to then try and claim plausible deniability to say, I didn't know what the source, it doesn't sound like a good story if the source was your brother, because the question would be, if my brother's about to settle a debt on my behalf that's worth over 600,000 rand, question one logically
where does the money come from?
Brother, where did you get the money from? And your brother is not a billionaire, and you know this. So the question would have been, where did you get the money from? Now, if it then turns out that the only source of that income was indeed his company called Scamega, and that company only has a source of funding from VBS, it is semantics to simply say that there's no link between me and VBS. There is a clear link, and this link could have been debunked by you asking the question at the origin to say, my brother, you've just given me this wonderful donation of 680,000 rand. What is the source? The reason I'm asking you this is I'm a public servant, and as a public servant, people have got a particular expectation of me. So if this ever comes out to the public, I'm going to have to be able to answer that question. So now to then fumble the answer and say, oh, no, I don't know that there was a direct link, it is unfortunately not good enough.
I need to ask a question before we run out of time. We've seen that the finance minister at the ANC's NEC, Tito Mboweni, has called on the government to make urgent choices with regards to the Treasury's growth plan. Do you think this is an indication of him throwing down the gauntlet to the NEC?
It is. It's definitely something that is overdue, because what we've been missing in the country is a politician who's courageous enough to tell the other politicians what the true state of affairs is. And I think probably Tito Mboweni is a person who's realized that being in control of the public purse means that he has an elevated responsibility to actually tell the facts as it is. Now, of course, what you've seen with the ANC in particular is that it engages in this game of political concessions. So somebody will come and say, well, you shouldn't pay for that, and then they're like, but what happens if we don't pay for that? What happens to become our political alliances and political partners? So they always have these particular considerations that they need to have, so it becomes very difficult for them to take the right critical and difficult decisions at critical points in time. And I think in this instance, when you're talking about state finances, the one thing that's unique about state finances is that they eventually run out. So Tito Mboweni is in a unique position to simply say, look, unless you do things differently, soon enough there'll be no money left. But is he likely to get political support for some of the things that he suggested, especially within the tripartite alliance? He's mooted sales of SAA and some of Eskom's coal-fired power stations. He's also bemoaned the fact that there's faltering growth and the tax hikes are clearly not helping bring in revenue. Is he likely to? His great tragedy, and I suspect also our great tragedy, is that he's talking about these things, having this conversation at precisely the wrong time. So, of course, no political party is going to champion any restructure that says we're going to cut 6,000 or 10,000 jobs in just one entity when you've got the highest unemployment on record in the country. So, of course, the problem here is how do you actually implement some of these reforms without actually accelerating a pre-existing crisis? And this is why you're going to see the resistance coming from the other social partners and other political alliance partners to simply say, look, we might believe and in principle in what you're saying, but Duke, it cannot be done at this particular point in time.
But where's he likely to find sympathy, and I mean meaningful sympathy here? Because surely there must be some reasoning if somebody says, we are experiencing large overruns of infrastructure projects that are causing us a lot in wasteful expenditure. We've got senior management earning huge amounts of money when we're not creating jobs. Surely reason has to come to bear on somebody. And where is he likely to find that favor? And is it likely to galvanize those within the party to do anything about it?
It would be very easy for him to find that support if there was some strong accountability mechanism. So if somebody says, for example, look, we ended up in this problem because there was a cost overrun at that particular coal power station that we're trying to build, and this is the person responsible for the cost overrun, let us remove that person so at least we remove the root cause of the problem. Then it'll be easy for people to say, look, at least you're addressing these issues. But what we have here is a vacuum of accountability where nobody feels individually accountable for the state of the nation and the state of the economic affairs. So everybody will say, yes, we hear that you're saying there's a big problem out there, but it wasn't my department. And even if you say that it was my department, I wasn't acting alone. I was acting in alliance with other parts of the state. So that lack of accountability and strong instruments of holding people to account means that literally everybody might be sitting in the NEC room now and say, we hear that the state isn't dysfunctional, but I didn't do it. And everybody collectively says I didn't do it. So therefore, who are you holding to account?
Khaya Sithole, thank you very much for your time and your insights. Political analyst Khaya Sithole. We're going to take a quick